I'm Delilah, and this is my story. The valley of Sorek smells of crushed grapes and river silt in the evening, when the heat finally loosens its grip on the hills, and the wind carries the sound of goats bleating their way home. I have lived here long enough to know every color the sky turns before dark: amber, then rust, then the deep bruised purple that swallows the last light over the ridge. It was on an evening like that, ordinary in every way a person could name, when the men came to my door and changed the rest of my life. I did not ask to become the woman remembered for what happened next. I was simply a woman of Sorek, living on the border between two peoples who hated each other with the kind of hatred that has forgotten its own beginning. My people, the Philistines, called the hill country beyond the valley the land of the Hebrews, the way you might name a wound, with contempt, because it still hurt. And there was a man in that land, a judge of Israel, whose name alone could empty a room of soldiers: Samson. I had heard the stories before I ever laid eyes on him. A man who killed a lion with his bare hands as if it were a kid goat. A man who struck down 1,000 of our men with the jawbone of a donkey and walked away singing. A man who tore the gates of Gaza from their sockets, posts and all, and carried them on his shoulders to the top of a hill miles away, just to prove he could. Our commander spoke his name low, like men speak of a plague they cannot cure. And I confess, before I ever loved him, before I ever betrayed him, I feared him the way you fear a storm you can see coming but cannot outrun. So when he came down into the valley, and his eyes found mine, I did not know whether I was standing in the path of the storm or somehow, impossibly, at its center. I will not pretend our time together was only calculation. That would be a lie, and I have told enough lies to last several lifetimes. I do not need to tell you one now. There were evenings when he sat in my courtyard and made me laugh until my sides ached, when he pulled thorns from my sandal with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands strong enough to snap bronze chains like wet reeds. There were nights I lay awake beside him, listening to him breathe, and felt something in my chest that frightened me more than any Philistine lord ever could. I want you to know that. Whatever else I am remembered for, I did not begin as a woman without a heart. But hearts are complicated things, and mine was already promised to something else before Samson ever crossed my threshold. They came to me on a night the wind was blowing dust in off the Shephelah, 5 lords of the Philistines, their robes still holding the smell of the sea. I remember the weight of the silver they laid before me, 1,100 pieces from each of them, more silver than I had seen in my whole life gathered in one place, enough to buy land, servants, safety for the rest of my days. But it was not only the silver that moved me. It was fear, too. The old fear. The fear every one of us carried who had watched our brothers and fathers come home broken, or not come home at all, because of this one man from the hill country. "Entice him," the Lord of Ekron said, leaning close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath, "and see wherein his great strength lies, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him." I remember my own hands, steady as I took the silver, though something underneath my ribs was not steady at all. I told myself I was simply a woman doing what a woman in my position must do, protecting my people, securing my future, playing the only game a border woman with no army and no name was ever given pieces to play. I did not let myself ask that first night what it would cost the man sleeping in my house, trusting me the way you trust the ground beneath your own feet. That is often how sin begins, I have come to understand, not as a leap, but as a series of small, reasonable steps, each one whispering that it is not so bad as the last, until you turn around and cannot find the path back to where you started. "Tell me, Samson," I said to him one evening, the lamp between us throwing long shadows across the wall, my voice light, teasing, the way a woman speaks when she wants a man to believe the question means nothing. "Tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound to afflict you." He smiled, that slow, knowing smile of a man who has been asked this before by soldiers with less charm and worse intentions. "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that were never dried," he said, "then shall I be weak, and be as another man." I believed him. I do not know why I believed him, except that I wanted to, and wanting makes fools of all of us. I sent word. The lords brought 7 fresh bowstrings, still damp, still smelling of the animal they came from, and I bound him while he slept, my hands trembling, though I told myself it was only mischief between lovers, only a game. Then I woke him with the words we had agreed would be the signal, the words that still echo in my memory louder than anything else I have ever said. "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson." He snapped the bowstrings like a man breaking spider's thread singed by fire. My heart dropped through the floor of that room. The men hidden in the inner chamber, waiting to seize him, shrank back into the shadows, and I sat there with the broken cords in my lap, laughing it off, telling him he had mocked me, that he did not truly love me if he would not trust me with the truth. I felt underneath the laughter something colder settling in. Not guilt yet, not fully. Just the dawning knowledge that I had crossed a line I could not uncross, and that I intended to cross it again. He told me new ropes, never used, would bind him. I bound him with new ropes. He broke them as though they were threads of tow touched by flame, and the men in the chamber fled again into the dark. And again I turned my anger outward instead of inward, weeping that he was making a mockery of me, that he did not love me at all. I want you to understand something about the human heart in this moment, because I have had years, decades, to turn it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by water. I was not stupid. I knew with each lie he told me that something in him was still holding back the truth. And yet each time, instead of asking myself why I kept demanding an answer that could only end in his destruction, I told myself I was closer than before. I told myself the silver was almost mine. I told myself this was simply what needed to be done. Sin rarely announces itself as sin while it is happening. It dresses itself as necessity, as love, as cleverness, as survival. And it is only afterward in the silence that you see its true face. He told me to weave the 7 locks of his hair into the web of a loom and fasten it with a pin, and I did that too. And still he tore free, pulling the pin and the beam of the loom along with it. And still I wept and accused him of not loving me, day after day pressing him, wearing him down the way water wears down stone, not with force, but with relentless patience. And then came the night I have relived 1,000 times since, the night he finally told me the truth. "There hath not come a razor upon mine head," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it, almost a confession, almost a prayer. "For I have been a Nazirite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man." I felt it. I felt the truth in those words, the way you feel the first drop of rain before a storm breaks. He had told me everything. Not a riddle this time, not a half lie meant to test me. The whole terrible, sacred truth of who he was and what made him different from every other man who had ever walked this earth. And God help me. I sent for the lords of the Philistines that very night, and I called for a man to shave the 7 locks from his head while he slept in my lap, exhausted from loving me, trusting me, even now, even after everything. I remember the sound the blade made. I remember his breathing, slow and deep, a man finally at peace, finally believing he had given all of himself to someone who would keep it safe. I remember calling out, "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson," one final time, and watching him wake, the same confidence in his face as always, the same certainty that he would rise up and shake himself free as he had before. But this time was different, and we both knew it in the same breath. This time the Lord had departed from him. They took him. They put out his eyes. They bound him with fetters of brass and led him to Gaza to grind grain like an ox in the prison house, this man who had torn city gates from their foundations, now stumbling blind between millstones. And I do not know, to this day, whether the silver I received that week ever felt as heavy in my hands as the truth of what I had done felt in my chest every night afterward. Scripture does not tell you what became of me after that. I have wondered, in the long years since, whether that silence is itself a kind of mercy, or whether it is simply that my part in the story was finished the moment his hair fell to the floor. What I can tell you, from inside this life I chose, one small compromise at a time, is this. I did not wake up one morning and decide to destroy the deliverer of Israel. I made 100 smaller choices first, each one telling myself I was still in control, still choosing for good reasons, still someone who loved as much as she calculated. That is how most great falls happen. Not in a single leap, but in a slow surrender of the small things. Trust, patience, truth-telling, until the large thing has already been lost. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Watch the small compromises. Watch the moment you begin asking someone to prove their love by handing you the very thing that could destroy them. Watch what you do with power when it is offered in silver and whispered in the dark. God's purposes were not undone by what I did. He used even Samson's final, broken moment for a deliverance greater than any he had accomplished with his sight or his strength. But I was not part of that redemption. I was the valley the storm passed through, and I have had to live with the wreckage of my own choosing ever since. Guard your heart in the small hours when no one else is watching, when the reasons for one more compromise sound so very reasonable. That is where every great fall begins. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with a friend.